Serena had never been a slave. Before the invasion, she had been a prosperous woman, a mother, and a wife, living in peace with her family. But all of that changed when the Vorath Empire descended upon her peaceful world. Her husband, a soldier who had once fought bravely in defense of their home, was killed in the first wave of the attack. In the chaos that followed, Serena and her young son, Karen, were captured and taken to the alien capital, a city of steel and marble that towered over the landscape like a silent sentinel. The ruler of the Vorath Empire, King Vorath, was a being of immense power and cruelty, ruling with an iron fist over thousands of planets. His army had slaughtered entire civilizations in the name of conquest. Serena's world was no different, and her capture was merely a consequence of that larger plan. She was dragged to his palace, where her future would be decided, her life now a piece in his game of conquest. King Vorath, towering and regal, looked down at her with cold, emotionless eyes. His soldiers had stripped her of her dignity, and the once proud mother now stood broken, her son clutched in her arms. The king had long grown tired of the millions of planets under his rule. The conquest had become routine, and it had lost its thrill. He had become bored with his power and found solace in cruelty. But Serena was different. She was not like the others. Her resilience, despite the loss of her husband and the horrors she had endured, intrigued him. He had decided to make her an example, an object to show how far his power stretched. "You are a widow now," King Vorath spoke, his voice as cold as the void itself. "Your son is nothing more than a burden. You will serve as a reminder to the others that resistance is futile." Serena stood silent, her body trembling with anger but unwilling to show weakness. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in the face of such an overwhelming force only brought pain. She wasn't sure how long she could hold her composure, but she knew that if she allowed herself to break, her son would have no one left to protect him. With a wave of his hand, King Vorath gave the order. "Take them to the human soldier," he commanded. Serena's heart sank as two soldiers approached her and her son, shackling their arms and dragging them out of the chamber. They had been chosen for something far worse than death. They were to be slaves. The king had decided to give them to one of the soldiers under his command, a human named Captain Elias, a man who had earned his loyalty through brutal deeds. A part of Serena wondered if Elias was more than just another soldier in the king's army. She had heard whispers of rebellion in the ranks, of soldiers who were not entirely loyal to their ruler. But she didn't know if that would matter in her fate. She and Karen were taken aboard a transport ship, the cold, sterile environment only heightening the terror that gripped Serena's chest. As they arrived at the military base, they were led through the barracks, where soldiers jeered and taunted them. They were mere objects, just another acquisition in the king's eyes. When they reached Captain Elias's quarters, the door opened to reveal a man in his late 30s. His uniform was weathered, and his demeanor was hardened from years of war. He didn't look at them with disdain, nor did he express pity. He simply observed them as if trying to understand what had just been handed to him. Serena's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something in his expression: regret. It was faint, but it was there, and for the briefest of seconds, she allowed herself to hope. Captain Elias stepped aside, allowing them to enter. "You will stay here," he said, his voice firm but devoid of cruelty. "I was ordered to take you in, but you're not my prisoners. You're free to do as you please, within reason." He paused before adding, "King Vorath didn't make it clear what I'm supposed to do with you." Serena didn't trust his words completely, but there was something about his tone that made her wonder if this man, this soldier, was different from the rest. She could see that he wasn't like the other soldiers who had been part of the invasion, treating her and her son with contempt. Days turned into weeks, And while their living conditions were better than most slaves, the weight of their situation was never far from Serena's mind. Captain Elias, though not openly hostile, kept his distance. He gave them food, clean clothes, and allowed them to stay in a modest room at the base. Corinne, always inquisitive and brave, would ask about his father, about the world they had once known. Serena would tell him stories, trying to keep the memory of their life before the invasion alive in her son's heart. But as time went on, Serena began to notice something strange. Elias was not the man she had first thought him to be. He spent more and more time talking to the other soldiers, speaking in hushed tones. His eyes would linger on Serena, but it was not pity that filled them. It was suspicion. One evening, while she was tending to Corinne's wounds after a minor scrape, Elias entered the room unexpectedly. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice low and strained. "But I'm not what you think I am. I'm not loyal to King Vorath." Serena looked at him, her heart racing. "What do you mean? Are you going to turn us in?" He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, I've been part of a rebellion against the king, but it's not as simple as you think. Vorath, he's not just a tyrant. There's something much darker at play, and I've seen it firsthand." Serena's breath caught in her throat. She had always suspected that there was more to the Zareth Empire's conquest than mere power. Could it be true? Could Captain Elias be the ally she needed? "I've seen the horrors of this empire," Elias continued, "and I know you don't trust me. But we can help each other. I need you to trust me, for your son's sake." Torn between fear and hope, Serena looked down at Corinne, who had fallen asleep in her arms. Could she trust this man who had been a part of the very army that destroyed her world? Could she take a chance on him? But then again, what did she have to lose? "I'll help you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But only if you promise me one thing. You will take us out of this empire, away from the king's grasp." Elias nodded solemnly. "I promise." As the days passed, Elias kept his word. He carefully orchestrated their escape from the military base, working in secret with other rebel soldiers who had grown disillusioned with the king's regime. They moved quickly, using the chaos of an attack on a nearby outpost to cover their tracks. In the end, Serena and Corinne were free. They were no longer slaves, no longer pawns in the king's cruel game. But they knew the journey ahead would be fraught with danger. The rebellion had just begun, and the fight against King Vorath's empire was far from over. Serena, once a widow, now stood not just as a mother, but as a warrior, fighting for her son's future, for freedom, and for the possibility of redemption. Captain Elias had become more than just an ally. In the darkness of their struggle, he had become something else entirely, a symbol of hope. And together, they would bring down the empire that had destroyed so many lives.